feeling isolated at the top, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're carrying real weight, and it's the leaders who last are the ones that actually have the right support rather than trying to carry it all alone. Well, the reality is that the higher you go in an organization, the fewer peers you naturally have, around you inside your own kind of world or organization you're in. The pyramid often looks like this. So, that means just by very nature, your peer group can become smaller as you, build your career up the ladder, but all that's going around you at that time can make people often feel in those big jobs and those big positions that they can't speak honestly. Welcome back to Brave, Bold, Brilliant. I'm Jeannette, and today what I want to talk about is something that most leaders feel, but very few people say out loud. Because from the outside, being the CEO, the founder, the boss, the person at the top of the org chart, it can often look like the dream, can't it? And for yourself, you may have spent years and years and years getting to that top position, but actually when you get there, you realize it can be the loneliest place in the world, but all that's going around you at that time can make people often feel in those big jobs and those big positions that they can't speak honestly and can't actually show the vulnerability that is so important. And I can tell you from 30 plus years of running large global businesses and now working closely with leaders one-to-one, that what it actually feels like more often than not is just really lonely. And you can be surrounded by, a team of hundreds, thousands, but actually you may sit on board meetings every week, have a packed calendar, and still feel like there is genuinely no one you can turn to who truly understands the weight that you're carrying. So I don't know, does that sound like familiar to you? Because certainly I can honestly say that I have been in that position many, many times throughout my career, and it can just feel so isolating at the top. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous if it's left unaddressed. So, let's actually talk real. Let's talk about it and let's get into it because, it's so important that here at Brave, Bold, Brilliant, we are building a community, and a community has each other's backs. A community talks about the real challenges as well as the opportunities. So, I'm going to take you through 8 key points that really have sort of resonated with me throughout my career. So the first one is, why does isolation happen in the first place? Well, the reality is that the higher you go in an organization, the fewer peers you naturally have, around you inside your own kind of world or organization you're in. The pyramid often looks like this. So, that means just by very nature, your peer group can become smaller as you, build your career up the ladder. And, you can't always be fully honest with your team, your board, or even your family about what's really going on. Now, I'm not saying you're dishonest in these roles. You're not dishonest, but sometimes you feel like you have to maybe protect the team. Very often I found in my time in very, senior leadership positions, whether it was a CEO or an MD or as a business founder and entrepreneur myself today, that sometimes you're the sandwich between, sort of the pressure that's maybe going on from the stakeholders, the shareholders, and the board at a macro level versus, actually protecting the team so that they can get on and focus on what they need to do. So that can often mean that, you end up in this period of kind of silence, really. And I think, from my perspective, when I look back through my career, I would definitely say the ego played a part. Because I was incredibly ambitious. I'm still incredibly ambitious today. But when I was building my career, I came from a very, very humble beginnings, very working class family, a family full of love. Don't get me wrong, but in my head, I wanted to achieve more. I wanted to be more. So as a result of that, almost sharing vulnerability and saying, I'm struggling a little bit right now, or I don't have all the answers. Back then, I almost saw that as a sign of weakness and not being a strong leader. So I kept quiet and I took that burden internally, to myself. So I think that can often happen. But as we progress in leadership, what you begin to see actually is that showing vulnerability, asking for help is really a sign of strength. It's not a weakness at all. So that leads me on to the second point, actually, that the pressure of being the strong one, because everyone looks to the leader for certainty, don't they? Even when you might not feel certain yourself. The business might be looking for you for the answers, the performance of confidence, even in private moments of doubt. So why admitting struggle can feel like weakness, even though it isn't. So this is so important. And, the third point is the decisions no one else can make for you. And there are ways, of course there are. You want to create an environment where you're taking on board the input from your team, from the rest of the board, from your senior leadership team. But when push comes to shove, ultimately the buck stops with you. And that can often be about making those really unpopular choices and unpopular decisions that can mean the difference between, is the business going to survive or is the business going to fail? And that can often mean, having to exit people or say farewell, maybe a redundancy program, a restructuring program. And these are decisions that affect people's livelihoods and lives. And unfortunately, I've had to do that many, many times through my career. I've had to say farewell. I've had to restructure organizations. I've had to take cost out, because of the external environment sometimes, and that weight is different from any other role in the business. And whilst you may come across like you're very confident and comfortable making those choices, it doesn't mean to say that we don't feel it. We're all human beings at the end of the day, so I just really think it's important to talk about this, and the reality is, that your team, yes, they can support you, but they can't be your support system, really. Not truly when you're in some situations. And there's naturally a boundary, isn't there, between the leader and the rest of the team. And that doesn't mean to say that you don't enjoy being in each other's company, you don't respect each other, but there is a line, there is a line between, and the risk of blurring those lines when leaders lean too heavily onto their teams for emotional support, well, that can be dangerous as well. So that's another reason why you can feel quite isolated and quite lonely at the top of an organization. And it's not actually, it's not about distance. It's actually about role clarity. So, I just think it's a difficult place to be, but we need to talk about it. So, if you don't address the isolation, if you don't address the fact that you may actually be struggling a little bit in that big number one job, what are the dangers of that is your body will tell you. Let me, and I've had burnout. I have had burnout where I've ended up in hospital, I've ended up having surgery and all sorts of things. So burnout is a very real thing. But if you're an ambitious leader, which, I'm sure you are, I know I am myself, sometimes we think we're invincible. But when you're in particular in the top job and you're not addressing that isolation, it can really lead to burnout, poor decision making, your judgment being a bit impaired. And that isolation can compound over time until it affects your health. It might affect your relationships and the business performance. And those leaders that wait too long to get support, it can actually cost them more than just the job and the results. So I've certainly been there where, in particular, I used to be traveling internationally 70% of the time. I'd be coming in from Heathrow. My husband would be going out for a business trip, and we were like ships that passed in the night. And there was plenty of times where, our relationship, there's a danger of us going east and west. So it can also affect your relationships, and it takes a strong person to recognize what's going on and to stop. But what genuinely helps, really, and what doesn't help, is you don't want just generic networking, but to kind of scratch the itch. It's really about having, safe place, a trusted network of individuals that allows you to have confidential, judgment-free space to think out loud. Peer relationships with others who understand the specific pressures of the top job. And this is exactly where having a business mentor or a coach comes in. And this is why when I work one-to-one with a business leader, it could be an executive, it could be a senior leader in an organization, it could be an entrepreneur, what we create is that absolute safe space to be able to talk about everything that's going on. Because at the end of the day, when you're leading a business at the top, actually, the lines do get blurred between business, personal life, relationships, health, etc. So when you're actually going into a mentoring relationship, it's critical that you have the trust. It's critical you get the right person that you gel with and you can rub along with, because the chances are you might be starting talking about something that's a business related topic, but actually often leads into other things that are going on in your life. So, if this is actually landing with you, all I would say is make sure that we're connected. Let's get connected on social media. You're going to find me, Jeannette Linfoot, with 2 N's and 2 T's in Jeannette, all over LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. And of course, with the podcast, which is on Apple Podcasts, is on Spotify. And of course, if you like watching videos, then our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, because we're here to really share the realities of leadership that often don't get talked about honestly. So the power of one-to-one mentorship is so, so critical. I can honestly say that through every single stage of my career, when I've had a pivotal change, I've actually reached out and I've had a professional mentor. I've had coaches at different times as well, and the two are slightly different. But a mentor is someone that has been there. They have a lived experience. They're able to advise you in certain situations. And, whether I got my first director position when I decided to leave corporate and go down the portfolio route, when I was setting up our own property investment business, I had a mentor at all those different stages, because what you need changes over time. So if you haven't got a mentor, you're missing out. Honestly, it is the one game-changing thing that you can take control of. And, it's about having someone that's walked the path, not just sort of studied it from a theoretical point of view. And that clarity comes from an outside experience perspective with, unlimited access between sessions is what I do when I work with people. We have a monthly session, so we have the accountability and the focus, but I make myself fully available 24/7, because when those big moments show up, you actually need to make sure you've got someone that's going to be available to support you. So if you're interested, if you feel that you need a mentor, and I can tell you now, it's the best thing you'll ever do, reach out. Let's have a conversation. I would love to be able to help you on your career journey, on your business journey. So, reframing isolation as a leadership stage, not a personal failing, is important. Almost every single leader goes through this. You are not uniquely broken. You're not broken at all. In fact, it's just part of the responsibility. But naming it removes that kind of power really that you had, that it's had over you. And it's the leaders who thrive are the ones that build support systems deliberately and not just by accident. So, be intentional with what you do. Leadership at the top can be the most lonely place. I know, I've been there, and if any part of this has struck a nerve with you, if you're leading at a level where you feel like there's actually no one you can be fully honest with, please know that's incredibly common, but it doesn't have to stay that way. That's exactly the space that we create in our one-to-one mentoring work. So reach out to us, drop me a message, send an email, so we can actually jump on a call and really understand what you're looking to achieve. And then what I'm able to do then is tailor a absolutely bespoke mentoring program and relationship just for you. And that is going to absolutely transform your journey. 100%. I have no doubt at all. So, as I say, if you want to take away one point, let it be this. Feeling isolated at the top, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're carrying real weight. And it's the leaders who last are the ones that actually have the right support, rather than trying to carry it all alone. And if this episode resonated with you, please do subscribe, leave a review, share it with, someone in your network who's a fellow leader that might need to hear exactly this right now, because they are not alone. You are not alone. And remember, it is by being brave and bold that you are going to unlock your brilliance. So I will see you next time.